From KOB4, this is Eye on New Mexico.
About over, and before we jump into 2025, let's revisit some of the biggest stories throughout New Mexico this past year. Thanks for joining us for Eye on New Mexico. I'm Griffin Rushton. We begin our look back at 2024 with one of the most destructive disasters to hit New Mexico in recent years. Not one, but two wildfires surrounded Ruidoso in June, forcing thousands of New Mexicans to flee their homes in a matter of hours. The South Fork and Salt fires scorched nearly 25,000 total acres together and killed two people in the chaotic first few moments. But it was the nearly 1,400 homes and other destroyed structures that brought the small mountain community to its knees.
Been tough because I've never been through this before, and I just keep getting cracked up about it because it's just, I know there's other families that are trying to look for their loved ones, and it's hard to deal with.
As if those wildfires weren't bad enough, the village was forced to remain locked down when heavy rain brought destructive flash floods to Ruidoso, a second emergency on top of the first one.
And we were just pushing water through, and that's all we could do is just try to get as much water out as we could. And like I said, I wasn't prepared for that level of devastation, and destruction.
The village eventually reopened to residents and the public, but village leaders estimate it will take years to fully recover from the disaster that only lasted a few weeks. Disaster also struck Roswell this year, just a few months after the city opened its doors to evacuees from Ruidoso. Torrential rain brought destructive flash floods to the southeast New Mexico City. Officials confirmed 2 people died in the incident, which also washed out roads and bridges, flipped over cars, and left a blanket of mud and debris across the city. The floods rushed in so quick, there were reports of people needing to be rescued from rooftops, among other emergencies.
This backyard right here was like 4 inches when I got here. Within 20 minutes, it was waist deep, starting on the back porch, licking the back porch. And then, it was a matter of minutes before it was in the house. And at that point, you just grab what you can't replace, which is animals.
These apocalyptic shots of a fiery train derailment near Gallup also made headlines this year. This was back in April. Federal investigators say 35 rail cars derailed near the state line, and 6 of them were carrying propane, fueling that massive fireball. Fortunately, no one was injured in this crash. However, it's still not exactly clear what caused this derailment. There was a fiery explosion in Albuquerque just a month later after a U.S. Air Force fighter jet crashed mere seconds after taking off from Kirtland Air Force Base. Officials confirmed the pilot ejected themselves from the jet before the crash, but it was still a shocking moment for one airline passenger at the Sunport.
My neighbors, the seat from me is saying, like, what's happening? And I said, I think an aircraft just went down, because we saw tons of emergency vehicles rushing towards there, and then all of a sudden the pilot made the announcement saying, hey, we're gonna be holding on the tarmac for a little bit. They just closed it down, and then everyone just got very quiet.
One of the darkest stories we followed this year was the killing of a New Mexico State police officer and the days-long search for the suspect. State police leaders say Officer Justin Hare pulled over on I-40 early one morning in March and offered to give a stranded driver a ride to town. Investigators say that driver pulled out a gun, shot and killed Hare, and then stole his police car, eventually pushing Hare's body out of the car a little ways down the road.
On a cold, dark, and windy morning, he offered help to a person he thought was in need.
It took 2 days to track down that suspect, later identified as Jeremy Smith, who was also connected to a murder in South Carolina just days before this incident. Smith somehow made it to Albuquerque during the manhunt, where a gas station employee recognized the spelling of his name and tipped off authorities. Bernalillo County deputies eventually arrested him after a brief showdown in an Albuquerque neighborhood. Hundreds of New Mexicans attended Officer Hare's funeral in Rio Rancho, along with other law enforcement officers, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, and other state leaders. Justin Hare was the second police officer killed in the line of duty in the span of just a few weeks early this year. In February, Las Cruces officer Jonah Hernandez was brutally murdered while responding to a trespassing call. Investigators say the suspect, who had a lengthy history of violent crime and mental illness, stabbed Hernandez with a kitchen knife multiple times. Police leaders say a witness stopped and then shot and killed the suspect. Albuquerque Police Chief Harold Medina made a few headlines this year, most notably after he T-boned a driver moments after blowing through a red light in his APD unit. Chief Medina was driving to a city press conference back in February with his wife in the passenger seat. He says he stopped to check out a homeless encampment off Central near the Fairgrounds. A fight reportedly broke out and someone pulled out a gun. Medina says he blew through a red light to get away and he crashed right into a man driving in his Mustang.
I clearly recall seeing the green light before going through the intersection. Then all of a sudden I saw a black truck come out of nowhere and slammed into me on the driver's side.
The crash sparked outrage among city councilors who questioned if Chief Medina broke APD policies and if he was still fit to serve as police chief. A proposed vote of no confidence was eventually withdrawn. However, the man inside the car Medina hit, who you just heard from, filed a lawsuit against the city, citing his long-term injuries. The Albuquerque Police Department was embroiled in a major scandal this year, all surrounding the agency's DWI unit and alleged scheme involving a local attorney. This case blew up in January when federal authorities raided the homes of several APD officers as part of an investigation. And since then, at least 10 officers were placed on administrative leave, with more than half resigning from the department before they could be questioned. This scheme involved officers arresting people for DWI, then directing them to a specific defense attorney who would reportedly help make things go away for a price, and then officers would not show up to court, essentially allowing the case to be dismissed. Now, Chief Medina said APD leaders started looking into this back in 2021 and eventually handed their case off to the FBI in late 2023, but he confirmed some allegations go back as far as a decade.
I think that they just developed such a close relationships with other members of the criminal justice system that they were able to hide things very well. And this goes to show how complex and how thoughtful this scheme was.
In January, Bernalillo County District Attorney Sam Bregman says his office had to dismiss more than 150 active DWI cases because of the federal investigation. The scandal also launched several lawsuits, including one from the ACLU of New Mexico.
Every person in the general public should feel safe, regardless of what they're being pulled over for. Nobody should ever be subjected to extortion by officers or lawyers. There is no place in our system, in our city, or in our state for this type of corruption to take place.
It wasn't all bad news for the Albuquerque Police Department in 2024. APD reached 99% compliance on its court-approved settlement agreement, which is essentially a long list of reforms the U.S. Department of Justice required APD to make back in 2014.
These improvements are a reflection of really hard work in the last 5 years, especially our officers on the front line and the community, to not give up on reform, to support reform, but also those officers to say, okay, we're going to work with this, the new policies, the new procedures, we're going to train on it, and we're going to own it.
Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller and APD leaders are optimistic the department will reach 100% compliance next year. Well, in case you missed it, there was a big election this year, and New Mexico played a relatively small role right at the last minute.
We're especially excited to have the support of record numbers of Hispanic Americans and Latinos. And right here in New Mexico, we're going to win a record share of the Hispanic American vote. We're going to win.
Former President Donald Trump there made a last-minute campaign stop in Albuquerque just days before winning the November election, and that was despite some so-called curveballs from city and state leaders. The majority of New Mexicans still voted for Democrat VP Kamala Harris, though, but Trump did gain some support in New Mexico compared to 2020, even after promising to launch the largest deportation operation in U.S. history, something New Mexico's Democratic leaders are already quick to challenge.
Mexico, across all levels of government, will fight it every step of the way.
We are not going to cooperate in any way in that effort.
we'll see what actually happens, but we're going to be ready, and we're going to do what's right for our city.
International politics also boiled over in New Mexico this year. A group of pro-Palestinian protesters occupied UNM Student Union building in late April, barricading doors with chairs and tables and vandalizing walls and other university property. A heavily armored group of state police officers confronted the group in the middle of the night.
They came in full riot gear with their batons out, and they stood around for like 10 minutes, arrested some of our comrades, trampled over tents, trampled over tons of donated stuff that the community brought out for us.
16 people were arrested in that incident, the majority of which were not UNM students. UNM and state leaders strongly condemned the violence and vandalism. 2 trials over the same deadly shooting with 2 very different endings. We're revisiting the Rust saga after the break. Plus,
y'all might remember the Big Eye. That was our largest by scope and by cost. This is going to be our second largest.
one of the largest road construction projects in recent years is chugging along in Albuquerque, and New Mexicans better get used to all those orange traffic cones.
Your motion to dismiss with prejudice is granted.
One of the most high-profile trials in modern New Mexico history came to a close in 2024. We're talking about the Rust movie set shooting case. Actor Alec Baldwin is a free man, while armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed will start 2025 in a New Mexico prison. Both Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed appeared in a Santa Fe courtroom earlier this year, each facing charges for the 2021 shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the Rust film set in Santa Fe County. Gutierrez-Reed went first. She faced a jury in March over an involuntary manslaughter charge. Prosecutors argue Gutierrez-Reed's unprofessionalism on set contributed to the unsafe working conditions that ultimately led to Hutchins's death, and a jury agreed, convicting Gutierrez-Reed.
It was fair. Someone died. I mean, you got to take responsibility, especially when you're handling weapons and you're in charge of those. That's your job.
That idea of taking responsibility returned to the courtroom in April when a judge sentenced Gutierrez-Reed to 18 months in a New Mexico prison.
You said you were sorry. You were sorry, but not you were sorry for what you did. The word remorse, a deep regret, coming from a sense of guilt for past wrongs. That's not you.
Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's trial often felt like an appetizer for actor Alec Baldwin's July trial, which made international headlines as the well-known actor returned to New Mexico to fight an involuntary manslaughter charge. Baldwin was holding the prop gun that fired a real bullet, killing Hutchins, and prosecutors argued he was reckless with that gun on set and was therefore liable for her death.
The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that like in many workplaces, there are people who act in a reckless manner and place other individuals in danger and act without due regard for the safety of others. That, you will hear, was the defendant, Alexander Baldwin.
Baldwin's trial took a shocking turn on day 3 when a Santa Fe judge agreed to dismiss the case over a Brady violation. That essentially means prosecutors withheld evidence that would have affected the defense's arguments. It meant Baldwin was a free man and marked the beginning of the end of the Rust saga.
The judge absolutely, I believe, made the right decision on the law and to preserve the integrity of our judicial system.
We regret that the judge did not exercise any of the other options available to her, which would have allowed the criminal prosecution to proceed.
Santa Fe prosecutors withdrew their appeal of the judge's decision in December, officially closing the door on any criminal proceedings. The Muslim murders trial also came to a close this year. This was another case that made international headlines back in 2022 when it seemed like someone was targeting Muslim men in Albuquerque. Muhammad Saeed was facing charges for 3 out of the 4 murders. A jury convicted him in one of the killings back in March, and by September, Saeed pleaded no contest in the other 2. A judge sentenced him to life in prison. The woman responsible for a deadly wrong-way crash on I-25 that took the lives of 2 first responders also in 2022 will also spend the rest of her life in prison. A judge sentenced Janine Jaramillo to 60 years behind bars for pretending she was kidnapped and forcing police into a high-speed chase ending in that deadly crash. 2024 was a significant year for New Mexico's state lawmakers, several of whom retired or were voted out of office. The 30-day legislative session at the beginning of the year saw not 1, but 2 gun control measures land on Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham's desk. That includes a mandatory 7-day waiting period on all gun purchases and new restrictions on guns at polling places. It was a heavy lift for Democratic leaders amid ongoing conversations about gun safety and Second Amendment rights.
Our job here is not to just pass bills and see what sticks. Our job here is to be smart about what we pass and be targeted about what we pass, and we believe that the waiting day period bill does exactly that.
Now, despite those big wins for the governor, she made it clear she wanted state lawmakers to do more to improve public safety in New Mexico. So she called them back to Santa Fe for a special session in July. And within a matter of hours, those state lawmakers sent themselves home without passing any new public safety bills.
The bills before us are so complicated at times and so deserving of our deliberative roles as lawmakers that we not rush them and do more harm.
State lawmakers stayed busy in the interim, though, discussing complicated topics like behavioral health treatments and New Mexico's juvenile justice laws well ahead of the 60-day legislative session in January. One of the largest road construction projects in recent state history got started this year. Anyone who's driven through Albuquerque knows we're talking about that I-25 rebuild. Crews are working to completely rebuild both the Montgomery and Jefferson interchanges while also expanding both directions of I-25. And naturally, that is requiring quite a lot of lane closures and other disruptions.
We see here is 100,000 cars a day. What we're going to expect in 2040 is going to be even greater than that. And so we're fixing today's problems and helping build capacity that's going to withstand the growth we anticipate on I-25.
And you better get used to all the disruptions. The roughly $268 million project is expected to take up to 3 years to complete. NMDOT leaders say the project is the second largest and second most expensive they've tackled since rebuilding the Big I more than 20 years ago. A massive reconstruction project at the Sunport also took a big leap forward in 2024. Airport officials unveiled the first phase of a brand new food court right before the holiday travel rush, almost 1 year after crews opened a brand new TSA checkpoint. The Dream of Flight project is essentially a complete revamp of the Sunport's interior. Crews moved that security checkpoint closer to the main entrance, opening plenty of space for new food and drink options, seating areas, and other passenger amenities. Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller says the $87 million project is the largest of its kind for the city, but it's not just for Albuquerque.
This is what the next generation of New Mexicans is going to grow up with. And I emphasize New Mexicans because we all know there are other airports that do a good job. But look, the vast majority of the state flies through here. And so this is, in many ways, a Christmas present to all of New Mexico.
The full renovation project was originally supposed to be completed by the end of 2024, but now Sunport leaders are shooting for a spring 2025 completion. The UNM Lobos are ending 2024 in a much different place than they started, the new faces leading the Wolfpack. And it's New Mexico's biggest event every year. We're revisiting this year's balloon fiesta and its eerie connection to one of the most famous balloon crashes in our state.
All right.
There we go.
That's a good look on you.
All right.
All right.
2024 was truly a transformative year for the UNM Lobos athletics department. In the span of just 12 months, UNM saw 3 different football coaches, 2 different athletic directors, but still just 1 men's basketball coach. UNM leaders poached Fernando Lovo from the University of Texas as their new athletics director in late November, taking over for Eddie Nunez after he left UNM for a new job in Texas back in September. And it only took a few weeks for Lovo to announce his first big hire, a new football coach. Idaho State's Jason Eck is taking the helm after Bronco Mendenhall left the team after just 1 season. And Eck is bringing his winning attitude to Albuquerque.
The foundation of our program is championship behavior. I believe you have to act like a champion before you're ever going to become a champion and get a ring on your finger. And it's how you do things in every aspect of your life.
And speaking of athletes, New Mexico's very own Mariah Duran competed in her second Summer Olympics. The Albuquerque native traveled to Paris, France in July to compete for Team USA on the half pipe. She didn't win any medals this time, but she still made New Mexicans proud. 2024 marked a huge milestone for one of New Mexico's more unique annual traditions. The 100th burning of Zozobra attracted roughly 65,000 visitors to Fort Marcy Park in Santa Fe. And fortunately, the weather didn't dampen this celebration. And it might not surprise you to know that 2024 was the year a Zozobra hot air balloon finally took to the skies over New Mexico. And with that, let's talk about the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta. 2024 marked the 52nd Balloon Fiesta, and it was another big one with more than 550 registered balloons, including 106 special shapes and an estimated 838,000 total guests over the 10-day event. Now, it wasn't smooth flying for all those balloons, though. On one of the last mornings, a balloon crashed into the KKOB radio tower west of the park, causing the entire tower to collapse to the ground. Now, according to the FAA, all 3 people on board were able to land safely, but that crash came just one day after the 20th anniversary of the infamous Smokey Bear balloon crash, which crashed into the exact same radio tower back in 2004. Now, we were able to track down one of the then teenagers who was on board and had to climb down that radio tower.
I didn't expect to go up in a balloon that day or that year, right? Much less being a, big balloon crash, right? So yeah, just an appreciation of living your life like with that kind of understanding that, hey, like this could end anytime.
We'll mention the New Mexico State Fair went on as planned this year, but it's really what happened after that made big headlines. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, along with other city and state leaders, announced the state is ready to completely redevelop the state fairgrounds into something more beneficial to nearby Albuquerque neighborhoods.
It is my hope and desire that this becomes a re-energized effort to modernize, to improve, to create opportunity in a much bigger area than just the state expo or state fair property itself.
2024 also marked the return of e-scooters in Albuquerque after a 5-year break during the pandemic. San Francisco-based Spin Scooters dropped off the first batch of their orange and black scooters around UNM in late September, and by mid-November, company officials say at least 4,000 people had already taken a ride, and data shows most of those rides were at least a mile long.
Able to replace maybe what would have been, a 1.5 mile walk with a short 5-minute scooter ride is really key in people just moving around a city and the livelihood that you have within a city. And so being able to provide that service in Albuquerque and hopefully continue to see it grow and expand within that realm is amazing.
Of course, Spin is not the only game in town anymore. Lime Scooters also dropped off 500 of its new e-scooters around Albuquerque, and that was right before Thanksgiving. But no matter which scooter you end up using, city officials are urging everyone to remember to follow the rules and ride them safely. Yeah, that's me right there, almost wiping out. Definitely a good reminder that those scooters are not toys. Well, you can find all of our coverage on all of these stories from the year on KOB.com. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next year with more Eye on New Mexico. Happy New Year.